Hello, welcome back to Is Anybody Out There? I'm your host, Sophie.
And I'm Rachel.
And this is another special spooky episode for Halloween.
So we today are at Gallows Hill. This is where the witches were hung during the Salem Witch Trials.
So we're going to be talking about the Salem Witch Trials today.
Yes, happy Halloween, everybody. Again, Twilight Zone theme song for people who just don't hear it.
I'm tone deaf, maybe. I play violin, but still tone deaf. But anyway, what do you know about the Salem Witch Trials just off the bat?
So the last time we were here, we went to the Salem, like the Witch Museum that's in town. And so I learned a little bit more. I actually didn't know much, surprisingly. For like living kind of close, I didn't really know a whole lot about what had happened. But we went to the Witch Museum and I learned a little bit more there. Kind of like the general idea of a panic that led to lots of innocent people, and maybe some who weren't innocent, who were witches, being killed. And then afterwards, people being like, yeah, maybe that didn't need to happen.
So how would you define a witch, or your understanding?
I guess from my understanding, my original understanding, if you were to ask me like 5 years ago, I probably only thought of it in the box in my mind of someone who like practices dark magic or some sort of Satanist sort of a thing, like a cult. I would kind of put all of that together in one. But if you were to ask me that now, I feel like I would also say just like maybe people who were really into plants, like herbalists or healers, just from different things that like I've learned about witches. So
where do you
I would put that in there too.
The current modern day understanding of a witch comes from?
I think that comes from the panic that happened and how people kind of would just get upset and come up with these different pictures in their mind of what to be afraid of. And then that now is something that we just kind of associate with the idea of a witch. That's what I would say. Maybe
that it's kind of evolved from that. Yeah.
Just like things that are creepy, people lump together and we're like, this person is a witch. Or like maybe one person looked like this. And that kind of led to the stereotype.
So Oxford Languages Dictionary defines a witch as a woman thought to have magic powers, especially evil ones, popularly depicted as wearing a black cloak and pointed hat and flying on a broomstick. And
that's interesting.
That's an actual definition, and I felt like that was kind of narrow-minded.
I think so too. I'm actually very surprised.
Yes, I was a little off-put when I read that, because I was kind of like, there's so much more to this idea that we have of what a witch is.
I feel like there's just so much, I don't know, yeah.
And there's so much wrong with that.
Yes.
I mean, that is the idea, the current idea of a witch, like from like the stereotypical Wizard of Oz. The Free Dictionary has a second definition of it: a believer or follower of Wicca, a Wiccan. So
okay, see, that's kind of what I was thinking, like my mindset was for a witch.
And the Wiccan, religion, I think, is trying to take back that title and draw away some of that negativity that's sort of put on.
So you're saying they want to be associated with witches?
Yes, I think that they call themselves witches. They're very contested definitions. It's difficult to truly define what a witch actually is, but I think that that's kind of where it came from. Because of the Salem Witch Trials and the hundreds of similar trials that happened in Europe, which resulted in thousands, if not millions, of deaths.
That's right. I forgot about that because I don't think people talk about that much.
I don't think people talk about that enough.
I literally had not heard of it until we went to the museum here.
So many people died, and people don't talk.
Way more than in Salem.
Salem was basically a little blip compared to everyone who was wrongly prejudiced against for being a woman in Europe. So I wanted to mention that because I am passionate about that. I feel like it's wrong that it's not talked about enough. So we're going to have some definitions here that we're going to use in our story. Do you know what a court of oyer and terminer is?
I do not.
Okay. It's a county court established to hear and determine capital crimes: murder, rape, treason, burglary, robbery, and in this case, witchcraft. The words oyer and terminer mean to hear and to decide.
Interesting.
So in the case of the Salem Witch Trials, the panel of judges on the court of oyer and terminer were thrown together. They were the 1%, the wealthiest, the richest, the elite of the time, the country. They felt they had to prove their worth to Puritanism because they were just coming out of a series of failures of different things. We're going to talk about a war that they were involved in, different investments that failed that they were involved in. They felt like they had to prove their worth to Puritanism and their worth of being a saint or someone that God has accepted into his kingdom.
Interesting.
Another definition that we're going to be talking about is spectral evidence. And I'm pretty sure you've heard that one, have you?
I have heard spectral evidence.
Can you define that in your own words?
I like saying that because someone came to you in a dream or like showed up in your room who was a ghost that said this person is a witch or you need to kill this person, then they would take that and go to someone and say, they came to me, they said this happened, we need to kill them.
And that's basically it. Yeah. Okay. Spectral evidence refers to a witness testimony that the accused person's spirit or spectral shape appeared to him or her, the witness, in a dream at the time the accused person's physical body was at another location. So it's like their astral projection almost.
Okay.
In a different place, still part of them, but not in their body. And this evidence was accepted on the basis that the devil and his minions were powerful enough to send out these specters to these pure religious people in order to lead them astray.
I think demons definitely could do some wacky stuff, but also why would you then be like, okay, I'm taking the word of this demon to kill this person?
Yeah.
Like, why would you not think, oh, they're probably up to some sort of no good? Like, right. I'm not going to believe them and murder these people. Like, to me, that's a little
if you
chink
think it's
in
a
that.
Demon, it seems like demons lie. So why would you believe? Yeah, that's interesting. I'm not sure.
Why would they be coming to you to be like, all right, you need to get rid of these people to make God's kingdom better? Yeah. Like, I feel like that doesn't add up in my mind. Like,
do you know what a familiar is?
I feel like I've heard it, but I don't know.
Okay, in European folklore, the medieval and early modern periods, and familiars are actually used today. If you hear the crow, that's my familiar, is the crow.
Is it like a Patronus?
We're outside.
Is that kind of what this is?
Kind of.
Kind of?
Well, no, I don't know. That might be dumbing it down a little bit, but...
Okay.
They're believed to be supernatural entities that assist witches in their practice of magic. Sometimes they're thought to be malevolent. If they're working for like white witches or whatever, they can be benevolent. So there's kind of a weird intermingling feeling about these familiars. But in the case of the Salem Witch Trials, they're often categorized as demons. They're not liked. If we talk about a familiar in this context, we're understanding it as an evil spirit.
Okay.
The main purpose of the familiars was to serve the witch, especially if they were like a young witch or a baby witch or whatever.
So they're like a little helper?
Exactly, yeah. They're like, it's kind of like they're teaching them in their witchiness.
Interesting. Okay.
So, do you know anything about what the Puritans believed?
I think so. If it's similar to what Baptists believe, which I don't actually think it is.
Actually, Baptists were considered completely against the Puritan faith, yes.
I would say that they probably believed in one God. From what you were saying, they probably felt like in order to be accepted into heaven, they needed to work for it. I would guess that.
Kind of.
Probably not a lot of grace, probably not a lot of...
Very little grace.
Not a lot of women being able to do things, I'm assuming.
Yes, that's strong.
Very much men in charge,
absolutely.
I'm gonna guess.
Yes,
probably,
strong
that's kind of like
hierarchy, yes.
Okay.
Yes. So the Puritans definitely believed in the supernatural, and that everything that occurred was an act of God directly linked to the behavior of his people. And women were more susceptible to the suspicions of witchcraft because they were perceived in Puritan society to have weaker constitutions that were more likely to be inhabited by the devil. Do you remember when we talked about something like that last couple weeks?
Yes, I was actually just going to mention how that sounds exactly like what we learned with that book that guy wrote. That pretty much has just slandered women.
Right, exactly. So the Malleus Maleficarum, the information that was in there and the views on women, that spread really fast over in Europe, and then those beliefs came over to America and infiltrated the Puritan beliefs and just were underlying everything. So women healers had knowledge of herbal remedies,
things that could often be deemed, quote, pagan by the Puritans, and they were particularly at risk of being accused of witchcraft. The, quote, purification of the church that the Puritans desired required a strict interpretation of the Bible, including the passage, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live," from Exodus 22:18.
Yep, I think that's been brought up before, right?
Yes, I believe that we talked about that a little bit in that History of Witchcraft episode,
Yeah, I think so, a little.
So, the Puritans of Salem had a very orthodox view, believing that their souls were answerable to God, and that they had made a covenant between themselves and God that could not be broken. To Puritans, witches stereotypically were envious creatures who resented their neighbors' good fortunes and successes, maimed others' livestock, hurt people by sudden disaster or slow illness, or even worked their harm on others under the guise of neighborliness.
I mean, this kind of sounds like what we learned about on this past week, but the witchcraft that kind of blended Christianity, I think, and...
Powwow.
Yeah, powwow.
The powwow magic, yes, definitely. I think that also kind of had its roots in the healing traditions.
Yes,
so this is all kind of blended in together. And if you haven't listened to any of these other episodes that we're referencing, I would just suggest that before you finish this one, you just go and check those out. They're interesting. They have a lot more information.
They'll tie right in.
They'll tie right into everything that we're talking about here in Salem. So they supposedly could fly, shapeshift, become invisible, or even cast charms from a distance. Surviving records indicate that in New England, more than 120 individuals, 88 women, and 32 men were suspected of witchcraft between 1636 and 1691, and those are the years before the witch trials. Nearly all these women were women past childbearing years. If a man was suspected, it was usually in connection with his wife having been accused, and if the man denied this, it was usually believed.
So if you didn't deny it, would it still be believed, or would they say, oh, he's not denying it? Because I feel like he'd be like, oh, he's not denying it. He's a witch too.
Yes.
But then, so that's kind of what would happen. But then if he did deny it, he also would be a witch.
Mm-hmm.
So
it was very wishy-washy. There's no winning.
Witchy-washy?
Witchy-washy.
Oh.
So now we're going to talk a little bit about the Native American relations that were happening at the time. In 1689, the English rulers were William and Mary, and they started a war with France in the American colonies. This was known as King William's War to the colonists, and it ravaged regions of upstate New York, Nova Scotia, and Quebec, and it sent refugees into the county of Essex in Massachusetts, and specifically Salem Village in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Salem Village is present-day Danvers. Colonial Salem town became what is now Salem. Many of the accusers who prosecuted the suspected witches in Salem had been traumatized by wars on the frontier and by unprecedented political and cultural changes in New England. The displaced people created a strain on Salem's resources. This aggravated the existing rivalry between families with ties to the wealth of the port of Salem and those who still depended on agriculture.
So could you actually mention just again how long before the witch trials that happened, that there were all these people? Is this like the same exact time it's all going down?
All that stuff happening in Canada was just like 10 or 12 years
still
before.
Very fresh.
Still very, very fresh. And then there was still fighting happening in the frontier lands of Maine and even outskirting the Massachusetts area. So the fear of the Native American attacks was very, very fresh in people's minds. Like they would be constantly afraid that people were going to be attacking them.
Oh my word.
And they were taking on the refugees as well, so that put a strain on the resources of the town. And this kind of aggravated an already existing rivalry between families with ties to the port. So that's what I was talking about. It kind of aggravated that rivalry that was already there. Controversy also brewed over Reverend Samuel Parris, who became Salem Village's first ordained minister in 1689. And he was disliked because of his rigid ways and greedy nature.
Oh, yeah. A greedy pastor never goes down well.
Yeah. The Puritan villagers believed all the quarreling was the work of the devil, which, you know what? Fair.
Yeah.
Quarreling and dissension in the church is never good.
No.
I mean, I feel like there's always some level of that, but
I feel like especially if it leads to people being burned, I think it's definitely fair to say devil's work.
Yes. But before we go any further, let me actually correct one misconception about these trials.
Oh, I just said it.
You know what I'm going to say then?
Yes, they weren't burned. What am I talking about?
Yes, they were hung. They were all hung, yes. Just to clarify, in America...
I was thinking of the burning times over in Europe.
In Europe, they were mostly burned at the stake, so that makes sense.
No
worries. So in addition to all of that was happening, the town's church was having these quarreling problems. The towns of Salem Town and Salem Village, which were separate, they were like separate churches for each place, ran on an ambiguous form of self-government that heavily involved the ministers of the Puritan church. Salem Town had 2 ministers at this time. An elderly man by the name of John Higginson and a younger preacher named Nicholas Noyes, who would become heavily influential in the trials. In Salem Village, the minister at the beginning of our story was George Burroughs, a hard frontier man from Maine who had gone to Harvard, but who had never been ordained. Because there was no parsonage, he and his wife Hannah had lived with a wealthy, influential Salem Village family named the Putnams. Now keep all of these names in your mind, by the way.
Very familiar to me.
But the minister was harsh with his wife, and she ended up dying in childbirth.
Oh.
George Burroughs borrowed money for her funeral from the head of the Putnam family, John Putnam Sr., and when he couldn't return the payment in a timely manner, Putnam made the policemen of Salem Village arrest Burroughs.
Well, good. Get him. Sorry.
Because of his inability to pay his debts, he was removed from his position as minister, and he ended up going back to Maine and finding a position with the church in Wells. This story about George Burroughs and the Putnam family is important, so keep that just in the back of your mind as we keep going.
That's interesting that he moved to Wells, though. I didn't know that.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Actually, did I know that?
I feel like you might
I think it's been mentioned, but I didn't
because
think about the fact that, like, of the role he played, I guess.
there's a road in Berwick called Witch Trot Road or something like that, and it's actually the road that they brought him in the witch cart down to go to Salem for his trial. Just a little foreshadowing, I guess, as to what happens here.
That is interesting.
Yeah. So after he left, Salem Village asked Samuel Parris to be their minister. Parris had had kind of an interesting life, part of which he spent in Barbados, where he acquired a slave named Tituba. Here it would probably be prudent for me to mention that I don't condone or accept the practice of owning another human person.
Right.
Definitely wrong. However, this is a part of the story and a part of history. Unfortunately, just have to mention it. I apologize for anyone if that's difficult to hear, but it's a difficult part of our history, part of it nonetheless. Anyway, Samuel Parris and his wife Elizabeth, his daughter Betty, and his niece Abigail all come to live in Salem Village.
And now this is Putnam's. So, okay, Paris. Right.
Yes.
Just gotta get the names straight. Gotta remember all the names.
There are quite a lot of names, and it can be confusing, so... They come to Salem Village because of the issues that Salem had been having with Burroughs. The community had decided to build a parsonage for the family. Parris was under the impression that he owned this house, but the church thought it was theirs, even though when the family had come, the community had given it to them.
Oh,
so there was a miscommunication happening there. As the family stayed and worked in the town of Salem, the church community kept delaying the minister's payments and wouldn't give him his winter firewood, which was kind of an important part of the deal they had struck when he agreed to take the job as their minister. Parris was furious with the congregation, saying that they had cheated him, but he stayed because he made a commitment to stay and he felt that he had to honor that. On a larger scale, outside of just the Salem Village and Salem Town issues, the fighting with the French and the indigenous people had caused the governor of Massachusetts Bay Colony to go into debt after borrowing money for the troops. So to pay for this, he raised taxes. And this pushes Salem Village far, far behind on paying taxes, and even further behind on paying the minister. So that is the situation that we're finding ourselves in when we come to February of 1692. In Salem Village, the village was in the middle of all of this stuff going on. And Betty Parris, age 9, Samuel Parris's daughter, and her cousin, Abigail Williams, age 11, begin to have fits in which they screamed, threw things, uttered strange sounds, crawled under furniture, and contorted themselves into peculiar positions. On January 16...
That would be frightening. I'm just going to say
Be odd, yeah, for sure. It was recorded that the Parris parents found the girls under some chairs, twisted in a weird position and speaking in gibberish. It would be disconcerting for...
Yeah, I'd be like, what the heck?
By February, the Parris family has tried everything to heal the girls, and they've only gotten worse. The local physician, a man named Griggs, diagnoses them as being, quote, bewitched, and, quote, under the devil's hand, end quote. Tituba, the slave in the Parris household, listened to another local woman and took her advice to make a, quote, witch cake, end quote. and that's rye meal mixed with the girl's urine and baked into a cake.
Oh, lovely.
But the folk remedy didn't remedy anything. The girls were sicker than ever. And another girl, Ann Putnam, age 11, began to experience similar episodes. Dr. Griggs could find no physical evidence of any ailment, and other young women in the village began to exhibit similar behaviors. Colonists suspected witchcraft, and accusations began to spread. On February 29th, under pressure from the magistrates Jonathan Corwin and Jonathan Hawthorne, the girls blamed 3 women for afflicting them: Tituba, the Paris's Caribbean slave; Sarah Good, a homeless beggar; and Sarah Osborne, an elderly, impoverished woman. Ann Putnam claimed that Tituba and Sarah Good together attempted to saw off her head with a knife.
Oh my gosh.
And the girls...
But if they attempted to do that, wouldn't there be some sort of mark? How do you fail at that and not have there be some sort of scar?
I have no idea. And the girls in the Paris household, Abigail and Betty, claimed that one of the witches had a familiar that was a bird with a human head. I don't like that at all.
I don't like that at all either.
That's really disturbing to me. In March, the 3 women were brought in for questioning. Tituba, when asked, claimed that she had learned how to make the witch cake from the woman who owned her in Barbados, who was a witch, according to her. Sarah Good was questioned first, and denied all the accusations against her, although the girls became, quote, dreadfully tortured and tormented, end quote, and continued to accuse her. So Sarah Good accused Sarah Osborne, because apparently she would mutter and tutter when she left people. So Sarah Good was like, this other lady, she kind of mutters a little bit. She must be a witch.
She thought she was like muttering spells under her breath or something.
Yeah, or something like that, yeah. Sarah Osborne, when questioned, also denied being a witch. And she questioned the veracity of the children's evidence. Yeah. Making her the first to question spectral evidence at the Salem Witch Trials. Tituba's questioning initially resulted in her denials as well. But after being pressed, she began to answer the questions, saying that the women were indeed witches. She said that they had indeed been hurting the children on purpose to try to get them to sign the devil's book. She described elaborate images of black dogs, red cats, yellow birds, and a, quote, black man, end quote, who wanted her to sign his book. She admitted that she signed this book, and said there were several other witches looking to destroy the Puritans. During her questioning by the magistrates, Tituba herself became afflicted in the same way the girls were, saying that Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne were tormenting her in anger for her confessing. Because she confessed, the magistrates believed her and decided that she had been oppressed by the devil and was not at fault. Ann Putnam, still afflicted, accused Dorcas Good, Sarah Good's 5-year-old daughter,
what?
of being a witch as well, and she thought that she recognized another of her tormentors as Elizabeth Proctor, the wife of John Proctor, another prominent townsmember. Magistrates even ended up questioning Sarah Good's daughter, that little 5-year-old girl, and her timid answers were construed as a confession.
What?
Which is just unbelievable.
That's
She's a
ridiculous.
little baby child.
Why would
like
you
one
even
of her little
say
cousins.
that it was her?
And after 8 months of living in the squalid conditions of the jailhouse, this little baby 5-year-old child went insane. Like, her mind was just not there anymore.
Aww.
Isn't that sad?
That's very
and
sad.
Just so angry.
Yeah, that's so purposeless.
Each of these women, first accused, was a kind of outcast and exhibited many of the character traits typical of the usual suspects for witchcraft accusations. They were left to defend themselves. Throughout the year, more women and some men were arrested, including citizens in good standing, and colonists began to fear that anyone could be a witch. A stream of accusations followed for the next few months. Charges against Martha Corey, a loyal member of the church in Salem Village, greatly concerned the community. If someone as pious as her could be a witch, then anyone could. Even her husband, Giles Corey, thought she was a witch. Martha was a very bold and boisterous person. She called herself a, quote, gospel woman. She asked for leave to pray, which was not allowed for her because she was a woman, but she started to pray anyway. She continuously denied that she was a witch, and she said, quote, "We must not believe all that these distracted children say," end quote. The questioning got more serious in April when Deputy Governor Thomas Danforth and his assistants attended the hearings. At the Proctor household, John Proctor kept his servant Mary Warren working hard, because she had been having hysterical fits for months, but the Proctors refused to accept her reasoning for her fits, that she was bewitched.
That's what she said, that she was bewitched?
Mm-hmm. Eventually, Mary tacked a note to the church door saying to pray for thanks to God for her deliverance, and some took this to mean that the girls had lied, although she did not expressly state this. And
wait, why did they take it to mean that they had lied?
Because she was like apologizing for acting in a fit.
Oh, okay.
So they thought she was apologizing for lying about what she was doing.
Yeah.
But she didn't say this in her note, although the note was very odd. And this caused many of the townspeople to, quote, cry out upon her, which means suspect her of being a witch.
Oh.
Abigail Williams, Reverend Parris's niece, would soon accuse both Elizabeth and John Proctor of being witches as well. Dozens of people from Salem and other Massachusetts villages were brought in for questioning. In mid-April, Ann Putnam claimed to be harassed by the specters of Giles Corey and Abigail Hobbs, and Ann Putnam Sr., Ann Putnam's mother, had a baby, who soon would die from an unknown illness. Oh. John and the elder Anne blamed the witches for the death of their child, and they resolved against the witches to destroy them.
And Ann Putnam, the younger, she was one of the people who said they were bewitched. She was not one of the people accused as a witch.
Correct.
Okay, just getting that straight.
Absolutely correct. On May 27th, 1692, Governor William Phips ordered a special court of oyer and terminer for Suffolk, Essex, and the Middlesex counties. The first case brought to the special court was Bridget Bishop, an older woman known for her gossipy habits and promiscuity. She was from a clearly abusive relationship and often accused of stealing, and had been accused of being a witch before. She quarreled with her neighbors repeatedly, and one, a man named Louder, claimed she had sent an imp to torment him after a fight.
An imp?
Yeah, like a little demon.
Oh, that's what they're called? That's what you call a tiny demon, is an imp?
Yes.
That is much too adorable of a name.
I know.
I was thinking like an annoying young child or like a strange chimp, but mostly just because it rhymes with imp, so that's what came to mind.
Have you seen the show Hell of a Boss?
No, I have not.
Oh my
Should I
word.
watch it?
I love it.
I've not even heard of it.
I love it. I am obsessed with it. It's just got like one season and one episode, but it's about little imps.
That's so
it's
funny.
About these little imps,
word.
And like there's one demon, but he's not really a demon, and I'll show it to you later. But yeah,
that's so funny.
I suggest that all of you watch it because it's adorable and hilarious. So, anyways, another named Samuel Shattuck blamed his special needs child on Bridget Bishop's witchcraft. The boy had convulsions, couldn't walk straight, and apparently, after interacting with Bridget, his quote understanding decreased, end quote. To me, it sounds like the boy had a medical or mental condition, but not so much was known about that at this time, and Bridget was arrested and tried for witchcraft. When asked if she committed witchcraft, Bishop responded, quote, "I am as innocent as the child unborn," end quote. The defense must not have been convincing because she was found guilty, and on June 10th, she became the first person hanged on what was later called Gallows Hill. She protested her innocence to the last.
And Gallows Hill is where we are hosting this podcast.
Right. Soon after the death of Bridget Bishop, chaos came to Salem Village. Everyone was accusing everyone.
Hello everyone, so I know we are in the middle of this episode, but I just wanted to make a quick little announcement that we've had a location change where we started out at Gallows Hill and we were remembering the witches who died there at the Salem Witch Trials. And now we're a little bit closer to home in York, Maine at the grave of Mary Nasson. I don't know if you remember, she was in an earlier episode, but she was cut down in her prime, accused as a witch, and should not have died so young. So if you hear some leaves rustling and everything, it's because we are at a different place.
Or some cars or something.
Yeah.
Or outside.
We are in a graveyard next to her grave, remembering her.
But anyways, in Salem, people were accused because they had been making soap, or because they had a lot of little jars in their kitchen. It was just like everything was causing someone to be accused. It was crazy.
That is interesting. If they had too many little jars.
Yes.
Like, that's like comical, almost.
Right? It was insane.
Yeah.
It was just horrible. So no one could remember who had first accused Rebecca Nurse, the elderly woman who lived on the edge of town. But nonetheless, the girls claimed that she pinched them and prodded them with pins.
Oh, yikes.
When in court, however, it was shown that the girls who claimed this had taken pins out of their own clothes and poked themselves. The jury initially found Rebecca Nurse not guilty because of this. But then the judge told them to reconsider because she had a vague answer. She'd answered vaguely to some question that they'd asked, and the judge was like, she didn't answer that quite the way we wanted her to, so reconsider. They bring her back out. The jury repeats the question. She doesn't answer at all. She just stares forward, not moving, just staring, as the afflicted girls go wild in the courtroom. And later it would come to light that Rebecca Nurse was almost completely deaf. She just hadn't heard the question at all.
Oh, no!
Yeah. But this doesn't matter. It doesn't make a difference. The jury comes back a second time, this time with a verdict of guilty, and Rebecca was hanged.
That is awful.
Isn't that horrible?
Oh, my word.
The majority of the formal accusations were made by the Putnam family, which is an interesting fact that may shed light on some reasoning behind the witch craze. Ann Putnam Jr. brought forth the most disturbing accusation after she had a vision of the ghosts of George Burroughs' wives, murdered at his own hand, crying out and claiming that he had killed them. One he had drowned, and the other he stabbed under the arm.
And was this proven to be true? Did this? No.
Nope, this is just something that Ann Putnam Jr. is saying.
I don't remember. Did he have other wives, or was this no one even knew he had other wives that he'd been married to?
He had wives that had passed away.
Okay.
It's possible that he killed them.
But there was no proof. This was not a thing people...
Nobody had suspected that initially, yeah.
Okay.
So she's just saying, well, they died. He must have murdered them because I want him to be a witch. So she said that his specter, that George Burroughs' specter, actually spoke to her and confessed that he was the leader of all of the witches in Salem, and that he killed his first two wives, and that he has bewitched the soldiers fighting the Native Americans on the Maine frontier. A group promptly went up to Maine to bring him back.
Oh my word.
Well, on their way back, a storm apparently rose up and overtook the group that had arrested him. Burroughs didn't try to run away, but nevertheless, the group thought that the storm had been an unsuccessful attempt of the devils to free him from the grasp of the righteous. And because of that, his fate was pretty much sealed at that point.
Which is awful. But also, I do feel like if you're already stuck in the mindset that you're pretty sure someone's a witch, that would be something that if it came up would make you very suspicious.
Yeah.
People controlling the weather. Well, I mean, obviously you did not, but
Right.
If you already are thinking this guy is a witch, we're taking him down, and then this huge storm comes up, that does look suspicious.
Yeah, I could see that.
It's very bad timing for him.
I know, it's pretty unfortunate.
That's unfortunate.
So all of the accused share three characteristics. They're all outsiders in some way. They all are geographically or socially mobile, meaning they've moved their area or they have moved on the social ladder. Or they have refused to show deference to superiors and the existing social order. George Burroughs was a Harvard-trained minister and a community leader, so why was he accused? What do you think?
Because of his wives. Because his wives were dead.
His spirituality and his commitment to Puritanism had actually been questioned because he had been interested in the Baptist movement that was happening. He had not been ordained, and so people were not very impressed with that. He was also intensely private when he was expected to be more active in the community.
Well, it seems like from these other people who have been put on trial and hung, that if you're a private person, you're much more likely to be thought of as guilty. All of the quiet ones, if you make a scene, people are which is funny, if you make a scene, people are just oh, you're fine. Clearly, you are not a witch because you are being hysterical. But then the people who have some presence of mind are the ones who are accused, which is kind of interesting.
I know. He was also known to be extremely strong, physically strong.
Oh, interesting.
Some people said he was otherworldly strong. He had I guess he had lifted a cart or something off of a person. Cart had rolled over a person. He lifted it off of him to basically save
impressive.
his life. And people were like, oh my goodness, he's so strong. He lifted this cart.
You do a good deed, you get accused of being a witch. Like,
right?
you save someone's life, you get hung.
Also, this kind of doomed him, or maybe wasn't super smart of him, but he claimed to have preternatural knowledge, that he knew what happened when he wasn't there. So
Yeah, that probably was not a good thing to reveal at this time.
an incident happened where he was strawberry picking with his wife and her brother. He had gotten lost or something, fallen behind, and they were talking about some things and then met up with him again at the end. And he chided his wife on something that she had said about him in the conversation with her brother. So she asked him how he knew about that, and he said he knew their thoughts.
That's creepy.
And
okay, right there, I also would have been suspicious.
well, I think it's possible he just eavesdropped and didn't want his
Didn't
wife
want to
to
admit it.
know. Yeah, but so for marginalized people, George Burroughs notwithstanding, magic gave them a way to take control of their lives. So, for example, the Rebecca nurse, suspicion may have fallen on these people because they may have had Quaker ties. Rebecca Nurse had taken in an orphan Quaker girl, and Sarah Good used a biblical phrase that had been used in a Quaker tract in her defense of herself when she was on trial.
Oh.
So that didn't really help her case.
Why would they think, because she was a Quaker, that meant she was a witch?
Basically just because they didn't like the Quakers. It was
Because the beliefs were different, and that was...
Right. It was a different
okay.
sect. It was a different religious sect. So they thought that the devil had formed it out of his ideals. Yes. The same with the Baptists. So George Burroughs, as I mentioned, had been under suspicion of being a Baptist. And the Baptists were different from the Anabaptists, which were actually like an extremist group. So George Burroughs had not baptized his children as babies, and he'd never led communion. He said this was because he had not been ordained.
Okay.
He also had a connection with the Maine frontier, and this was regarded as the dark corner of New England. It had all of the Native Americans that were considered heathens. It was not considered a healthy place for a spiritual, good person to be spending time.
That's kind of funny. That's interesting.
Burroughs had moved to Wells shortly before it had fallen to the Native Americans, and people wondered how he was not killed when Wells had fallen to the Native Americans, because usually, as a very important person in the community, the minister would always be one of the first ones taken out, unfortunately. This accusation of Burroughs solidified the link between the evil Native Americans, the evil frontier, and the witchcraft happening in Salem. And actually, I didn't mention in my notes, but he was able to say the whole Lord's Prayer perfectly, and if you were a witch, you were not supposed to be able to do that. But then Cotton Mather actually was like, nope, just because he can say the whole prayer doesn't mean that he is not a witch, and he was still hung.
Oh my word.
So, yes. Apparently, George Burroughs was buried very quickly in a shallow grave because of a heat wave. No, he was killed. He was killed for being a witch, and then he was buried very quickly in a shallow grave because of a heat wave. And it's rumored that his chin and foot still stuck out of the ground when he was killed.
That is
when he
horrible.
was buried.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so side note, there on Mary Nassau's grave that we're at right now, there's like a big wooden stone kind of where her like coffin would be. They should have put one of those on him. Pushed his chin and his foot right down. Oh my goodness,
you're right.
Covered it up. It could have stuck out, but then it would have covered him.
I think that people were just really, really, really afraid of him, so they just
wanted to like get it over with.
Wanted him out of the way as quickly as possible. There was only one case of actual black witchcraft, maleficium, that actually killed anyone in Salem.
So there was an instance.
There was an instance, yes. A young boy named David Wilkins, who was 16 years old, he became afflicted. The same sort of symptoms that the other girls were having. He ended up being unable to breathe, and Mercy Lewis, who was another one of those afflicted girls, she said that the specter witches would kill him, and he did end up passing away. Samuel Parris, the reverend at the time, noted him as being, quote, bewitched to death, end quote. When the body was examined, it was found to be covered in small puncture wounds with no swelling or outward signs of poison. and apparently his mouth was gushing blood.
Interesting.
The official cause of death, or, as official as it could get in those days,
Right.
was unnatural death by witchcraft.
Huh.
By the end of May, Mercy Lewis herself was so ill the doctor thought she might die as well, fading in and out of consciousness, and she claimed that one of the witches would kill her before midnight. That witch, whose name was Mary Esty, was arrested on the hope that if she was detained, Mercy might survive. Once she was put in chains, Mercy did begin to recover. This is an interesting story because it puts Mercy Lewis front and center and brings in another possible reason for the witch craze: post-traumatic stress.
Ah, okay.
Mercy was a survivor of the horrific raid on Falmouth, Maine, when she was just 3 years old, an event which killed her whole family.
Oh my word.
During the time of the witch trials, she was 18 years old and living as a servant in Salem. Minister Cotton Mather wrote a letter imploring the court not to allow spectral evidence, testimony about dreams and visions. The court largely ignored this request, and 5 people were sentenced and hanged in July, 5 more in August, and 8 in September. Giles Corey, the husband of accused witch Martha Corey, was also accused and questioned in September, and he pled not guilty and refused to cooperate with the court. He refused to answer.
Trying to be sneaky about that, but I heard you.
I have this really bad habit of fiddling with
She's
stuff.
Crunching
And now I'm,
the leaves.
all the
I'm
leaves.
everyone can probably hear that.
Yes, everyone can definitely hear that. I'm so sorry. Hopefully I'll be able to take it out. Rachel needs to sit on my hands or something.
She's trying to do it all sneakily so that I don't see her hand. She's hiding it under her leg.
So anyways, Giles Corey, he pled not guilty and refused to cooperate with the court. He refused to answer standard questions, and so he just remained quiet, remained silent. And because of this, they placed him on the ground and they piled an increasing number of stones on him for 2 days to get him to plead guilty.
He was alive for 2 days when they did that?
Yes. Oh, yes. But he never pled guilty, no matter how much weight they put on him. And he was eventually crushed to death. He is reputed to have said right before he died, quote, "more weight," end quote.
Oh my word.
Martha Corey, his wife, also refused to confess, along with 7 others, and they were hung on September 22nd. On October 3rd, following in his son Cotton's footsteps, Increase Mather, then president of Harvard, denounced the use of spectral evidence. Quote, "It were better than 10 suspected witches should escape than 1 innocent person be condemned." Governor
That's
Phipps,
so ironic.
Right? Governor Phipps, in response to Mather's plea and his own wife being questioned for witchcraft, then prohibited further arrests, releasing many accused witches and dissolving the court of Oyer and Terminer on October 29th.
So once someone he loves gets accused, then the fun is over.
Exactly. Phipps replaced it with the Superior Court of Judicature, which disallowed spectral evidence and only condemned 3 out of 56 defendants. Phipps eventually pardoned all who were in prison on witchcraft charges by May of 1693, but the damage had been done. 19 were hanged on Gallows Hill. A 71-year-old man was pressed to death with heavy stones, and several people died in jail. Overall, nearly 200 people had been accused of practicing, quote, "the devil's magic," end quote.
Wow.
So, Cotton Mather wrote a book called Wonders of the Invisible World, which was a whitewashed version of the trials, making the ministers and the court seem like they were the good guys, basically.
And kind of on that note, I'll mention that when we were at Gallows Hill, I don't remember if we mentioned this before, but there was no plaque. There was no plaque at all. There was nothing. Not even a sign saying what had happened there. Not even calling it Gallows Hill. And they just wanted to forget. They didn't want to acknowledge that this had happened.
So there's definitely been a suppression of truth of what happened in this area. Salem has become a metaphor for persecution in America, I think partly because they've tried to suppress what went on there originally. So what do you think really happened in Salem? Do you think it really was witchcraft or mass hypochondria?
I think that the real witchcraft was the people who were accusing the other people and having them be hanged. I feel like really they are the villains in this case. Although that too is hard to say because
in a time like that when like you don't know so much and fear is like so prevalent,
Yes.
part of me like gets it, that like these people are acting crazy and bad things happen in life, and it is easier, you see that even today, that like it's easier to blame that on someone than to just say, hey, bad stuff happens. I have some compassion for those people as well, but I do feel like in this instance that's the real witchcraft was what was going on to make those people accuse innocent people off of basically no evidence.
Right.
That was where the magic was that there was no evidence, and yet somehow they found people guilty.
Well, do you think that the girls were faking?
I feel like there could have been some sort of mental thing going on.
Like due to anxiety or PTSD
yes,
or something?
Yes, or like suppression of emotions because of the time that this was happening, that they were, they're Protestants, right? Is that correct?
They were Puritans.
Puritans, yeah. So that was even more suppressed, especially for the women and the girls.
Definitely,
and so I think that definitely could have played a role. That
something interesting that I was remembering was that in the Puritan faith, it was believed that if you falsely accused someone of witchcraft, it immediately damned your soul to hell. Even if you weren't found out, you were still immediately damned to hell. So that to me changes things. Yeah. Because I had been thinking fraud this whole time. Or,
me too.
Or, them having to release some kind of emotion. But with that behind it, it kind of leads me more towards at least a significant chunk of them were having some kind of mental thing or anxiety thing, or
like maybe they weren't trying to falsely accuse these people, but maybe because of what was going on in them, that was their only answer to what are these feelings I'm feeling, why am I feeling so anxious and stressed, and like this is not usual for me. And so the only thing they could think of was like someone else is responsible. And so they weren't trying to lie, maybe. I don't know.
I do think that they might have taken stuff that the adults had said and interpreted that in their own little child's mind as whatever, like as them being witches or whatever.
Yeah.
And I do think that the adults that were involved probably, like Ann Putnam Sr., I think that she probably had some political, social motive behind what she was saying, because a lot of, I don't know, that just feels different to me. There's that divide between the real little kids and then the older, like 18 to 30 women that were also doing this.
And the one that really like gets me is the little boy who did die.
Yeah, right? Isn't that interesting?
Like, that does kind of make me think like, okay, was this some sort of disease? Like, I don't know much about diseases, but it kind of makes me think of like mad cow disease. Where like...
Oh, you had mentioned mad cow disease before.
Did I?
In a different episode, in the vampire episode.
I guess it's what comes to my mind a lot. Because I'm
gonorrhea.
Mad cow disease and gonorrhea. Most problems probably can be boiled down to one of those two things. At least in these episodes that we're talking about. What if their food was weird, and or there was like a weird mold issue.
Well,
and they were in hysterics, and like it was a real thing, maybe there was no explanation for. I don't know.
That had been suggested as well. Ergot poisoning, I think, is maybe what you're talking about, which is like a mold that can grow on bread or something.
Yeah.
But to me, that has some issues. Oh, hello.
That kind of adds to the creepiness if you can hear that bell.
Yeah, that's a little spook for y'all.
Yeah.
All right, good. So, convulsive ergotism is caused by fungus growing on rye bread. It causes muscle spasms and, like, LCD, like trips.
Okay, well, see, that would make a lot of sense.
Also, it causes vomiting, gangrene, and neurological damage.
That's another one of those things. All right, sorry.
Gout, gonorrhea, and gangrene.
The 3 Gs.
But it's not reported that the girls ever suffered from vomiting, gangrene, or any neurological damage. So it's kind of interesting. Also, prolonged exposure would have led to permanent dementia.
Oh, wow.
And after the trials, the girls all seemed...
So they were just fine.
They were fine. They led normal lives, is what I was trying to say. And the symptoms don't come and go of ergot poisoning, whereas the afflicted girls' symptoms, they would
conveniently have it at a certain time. Or maybe not conveniently, I'm sorry. As you can maybe tell, I'm kind of leaning towards the fraud for a significant amount of them. I feel like diseases don't fit. I obviously am not a professional or even a historian of this.
Right.
Like
You've done a lot of research.
I have done a lot of research, and actually I had a lot more in my notes that we could have talked about in this episode that already is like twice as long as our usual episode.
So if you want a part 2 going into November to finish all of the notes so that this episode is not like 4 hours long, let us know in the comments.
Sure. So now, today, Salem is a hub of Halloween-y activity.
Yep.
There's a bunch of different reasons for that, but it's not really related to the witch trials at all.
Really? Oh, that's interesting.
There was actually like an economic crisis in the mid-1900s that caused some of the town officials to say, we need to bring in some tourists, we need to bring in some money. What can we do for that? Oh, here's the Salem Witch Trials.
So let's market the bad things that we've done.
Exactly. And you know what? This actually made the townspeople really unhappy. They didn't want to remember that, and that's kind of what we were talking about with the Gallows Hill. They didn't want a memorial on Gallows Hill at all. And they didn't want a memorial in the place that there is a memorial today either. That was able to happen at the tercentennial of the witch trials, when there was a whole committee that said, you know what, we're going to try to do this really respectfully. We think that because we've already capitalized on the witch thing,
right,
we should give them a memorial. There's all these people coming. We want to be able to honor the victims, as we're always saying.
Yes, yeah.
So I am for a memorial.
Me too.
I don't know what I think about all of the tourism that goes on there nowadays.
I think, at least my little 2 cents, is that I think it's good and bad. Like, I think it's kind of a cheap shot to be like, oh, hey, you know what? We'll just turn this into, like, Halloween Town because a bunch of people died here wrongfully. I think that that's no good. But I do think, like, people want to go there. Lots of people know about the Salem Witch Trials and are interested in it, like we are. So it is kind of cool historically to be able to go there as a tourist and be learning about it. Like, I really appreciate the Witch Museum that's there. Like, is it kind of touristy? Yeah. Are they, like, making money off of it? Sure. Yes. But it was really educational, and I learned a lot about what actually went down in Salem.
Yeah, I think they do a good job.
Yeah.
So I think that it's good that people are knowing what happened. I think that history, even gruesome history, is important.
Yeah, it should be laid bare and known, so you can't repeat it.
Right,
you know?
Exactly. I love Salem. Like, I'm not going to say that I...
No, I do too.
Don't. I think it's really fun. I love the Halloween-y aspect of it, but I do also get that some people could view it as disrespectful. I think that a lot of people that go there nowadays aren't intending to do that.
It is kind of cool, though. At least this is, like, my perspective when I was walking in Salem, whenever we go, is that, like, I am remembering the victims and not forgetting what happened. I think that is important.
Yeah.
You know?
Definitely.
Just like here we are at Mary Nassau's grave, where it would be kind of sad, honestly, if people didn't remember that she was killed in her prime. You know, there's a lot of different things on this grave. There's, like, shells and rocks. We put a little candle, like, there's little crystals, all kinds of different things, which I'm sure some of them I don't even know what they mean or what they're there for. But I do like the aspect that, like, people haven't forgotten her, even though she died when she wasn't supposed to. And I think that that's kind of the same for Salem.
So we want to say, is anybody out there who remembers someone who was wrongfully killed or had some injustice performed against them? Is anybody out there who honors them, honors their memory or that aspect of their life? And hopefully there is.
Yeah. If there's anyone out there, please tell us about that person.
We would like to help you keep that going, keep that alive.
Their memory alive.
And is anybody out there?
This podcast is written and produced by Sophie Robertson Cormier and hosted by Sophie and her sister, Rachel Richards. If you liked that episode, please make sure to like us on Facebook and Instagram and share our podcast with your spooky weird friends. Thanks, and spook you next time.
Say it loud for the people at the back.